Since I moved to Seattle, I've been looking at what kind of brain injury information is out there. I've been following the BIAWA's talks as well as others. And Maria presented on this topic, learning to get not to get to your limit with sensory and emotional stuff, kept coming up with people who were asking questions. And it was like, okay, let's talk about that, like the learning to not get to your limit. And the reason is to manage these kinds of symptoms. And then the last point that she said at the end of the Q&A was this point of learning to get what you can get from providers and from other people. I see it as other people because you need to communicate them what you need and not try to explain to them. Maria, do you remember it? Question two?
Question two. I think about not getting charged up.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you can begin, and I don't want to make you jump to question two. I'm all over the place with it, but yeah, sensory issues and advocating for folks with TBI. I like that title. So, Maria, your what's your clinical acronym, I guess?
LMHC, licensed mental health therapist.
Right. And you
Or
also
clinician, counselor. I don't
right.
know.
And you also had a brain injury, a severe TBI, and there's a lot to talk about with connecting those two worlds. So, with that, please, Maria, when you're ready.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I made the title for this sensory issues and advocacy for folks with TBI, and that was just based off of some of the questions that Daniel had asked me, sort of summarized as focusing not on why, so what, not why, of what we need, and then recognizing when sensory overwhelm is impacting our mood and our interactions with other people. So this is an image of me on the day that I left University of Washington in 2006. And part of why I put this picture was after last week's session with Sean, I forget the last name,
Siddiqui.
yeah, he made a couple points about how when we have an injury and a severe injury, our body is going to protect and heal the places that are the most vital for our life and our living in that moment. And so part of this talk is also to shed some light on how sensory things may not feel like such a big issue at the beginning of your recovery process, but as time goes on, they can be really a catalyst for a lot of mood and behavior issues that you might be having, especially in reaction or in relationships to other people. So as Daniel said, I went back to school to become a mental health care counselor, and kind of blending the two things of being a survivor of traumatic brain injury while also having the opportunity to work with people who have brain injuries and other neurodiversities, and having some of the education and kind of continue my education with neurodiversity, and plucking things that I feel are applicable to the brain injury population, and sort of learning more about those things. And I did want to just say, I know just like every brain is different, every brain injury is different. And so some things that I'm discussing today might apply to your world and your life, and some things might not. And so, take what works for you and leave the rest. And also know that we're changing as we heal. Something that doesn't really apply to you now in 2 years or 6 months might actually be like, oh, well, now I am noticing that that's happening to me, or that could be useful. So here are our beautiful, stinky, mooing cows. And this is just to represent sort of this heightened sense of sensations. Smells are louder, or excuse me, smells are stronger, sounds are louder, and can feel more difficult to separate. So you know, when you're in a room and someone has music and they're talking, it's probably too much. But you might really like music. It's just if there's someone who's trying to speak to you while the music is going, it's less, both things are not enjoyable. I also think sound is an interesting one because sometimes with brain injury, you are unable to discern like where a sound is coming from. So a sound that's outside, you might hear it after it happens, like there might be some space and time, or you also might think it's closer to you and have kind of a physical reaction to that. Taste, I think, is a really interesting one that kind of lives near smell, but with head injury, a lot of times our taste is impacted and things that used to taste good no longer do. Or again, like if we're smelling things that are really strong and maybe bad to us, we might not be able to stop. Like that's all we can focus on is that strong smell and not the good taste we're having. Touch, I think, is an important one because this can mean just like almost being overly cautious and putting space between you and others, or you might feel like even though someone's standing right here, like where my plant is, that feels like too much, like that is almost like a touch. Or even people bumping into you, that might be very uncomfortable or even agitating. And sometimes that's coming from a fear response in our brain, especially if trauma and PTSD are something you're also dealing with. And then visual and lights, the bright lights, I think that's pretty common for most folks that I know with head injury. But also like opening a drawer and it being scrambled and not being able to find what you're looking for. This can also create a real sense of overwhelm. So
Maria, can I just say something that that listing and that description and focusing only on sensory stuff, it's a perfect example of like the stuff that brain injury people deal with that I don't feel has ever been discussed. Because I manage that agitation constantly. And I was like, oh, this is a really good way to talk about it. And I don't know, I just want to say that I relate with that. And it's like does not point it out the
Yeah.
combination of those problems, you know?
yeah, thank you.
It's not discussed. Like it's a problem that's not discussed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing because it can be what's kind of bubbling inside of us, which goes to my next point when you talked about like um, what can help stop me getting super charged up and then like maybe having an outburst or getting frustrated or however that looks. And I think some of it is like we really have to be our own data gatherers where if I notice I have a poor interaction with another person or I'm just really frustrated, can I pause? Can I go backward? Like what happened to me earlier? Maybe one or two steps of my day earlier. Is it that I you know, was on a bus and people were bumping into me and it was really loud? And then I get home and have a poor interaction with my spouse because I'm super charged up from that experience on the bus, right? And so starting to recognize what are the places or the sensory situations that create that heightened and maybe more irritable you. And I put a little link here. This is just one of many articles, but just because it's on Brainline and it's really specific to brain injury folks. And they give a lot of lists of like different tools and techniques. And I had separate things that I talked about, some crossover in my Brain Injury Alliance presentation, which I think Daniel also linked. It's just a YouTube and it's a lot of talky, but those can be both useful. So another thing that I think can make this sensory stuff and advocacy challenging is our own expectations of self and the expectations of others can make it difficult to ask for actual needs to be met. So I think about it almost like I sometimes interrupt myself before I ask for what I really need, or I interrupt myself and I give a lengthy explanation for why I might need something. And this is coming from a place of self-judgment, of wanting to be like others, or other people in my family or my friends who knew me pre-brain injury, comparing me to my old self. You're just almost back to how you were, or whatever. And that really makes it hard to then say, okay, and I'm going to ask you for this. That is what I need because of my diversity.
Maria, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How does, and it's been 27 years, almost 27 years since I had the injury, but I'm wondering about, given what you just said, how does this relate to, I'm not even sure how to pose the question, to feeling self-conscious about the injury, as in, as an example, you meet somebody and you find yourself working it into the conversation, trying to explain to them, I had this brain injury, blah, 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 almost like you're apologizing
Right.
in advance of having done something that might be off color, unsuitable, however you want to put it. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about here?
That's exactly it. And I think it's really tricky because living in the world that we live in, where there's little understanding of brain injury, and I think there's starting to be more understanding of neurodiversity like ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, where there's some crossover. I think there's a lot of differences as well, but it might be, depending on how close you are to this person, it might be useful to use that more common language just in that situation, if it's more of an acquaintance, to say, due to my neurodiversity, and then try to and I'll get more into this. This is kind of a big part of what I'm talking about today, is like asking for what you actually need versus feeling like I need to explain to them why I am like this or why I do need this.
Yeah, it's almost like apologizing ahead of time because you feel like you're walking around with a sandwich board on you. You're
Yeah,
saying I'm brain injured. I mean, it's really weird.
I think it's super common. I would say this is something that I work with myself on, but also every client I have who experience brain injury. And I think we get a lot of feedback that we need to apologize because of impulsivity and because of lack of filter. And so you may, over 27 years, have been kind of trained to think this is the way, so that if I apologize first, then if I say something that's,
Right.
not
Right.
really fitting in this, they will understand. And that may or may not be necessary anymore. All right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So the 3 keys for today: know your limits. So what gets you charged up, recognizing both small or maybe less spoken about sensory stimulation as well as the larger sensory stimulation, and then starting to keep track of some of that stuff. So knowing what it is before, or sort of collecting the data after.
That implies that you have organizational skills, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I really simply mean like keeping notes and things, and I'll talk more about that.
Okay.
So instead of explaining why I need something, where people can oftentimes get lost, but that might be me excusing myself before I make a mistake. Instead of doing that, really try to figure out what it is you're asking for, and then also be aware of, like what we were just talking about, how self-judgment or social norms, social media, what we're kind of comparing ourselves to, how those things can get in the way of asking for what you need. And then lastly, perhaps being able to have more fun or less of that self-judgment so that you can enjoy your life more.
Can I say something about what Randy said and what your figure or what that list showed? Because I think it's really important about someone may not have the ability to make the list. Also, the awareness of those problems in yourself is extremely hard to do and not talked about enough. But I see this discussion and what you're doing is like, it's like we have these needs and we need them to connect with other things being met as well, because we can't work around it, you know? So it's really, Randy says a good example of the parts of it that still need to be there and
Mm.
it's not there. It's hard to get. It's really hard to get. Um,
The other thing I'm wondering about, Dan, is how does alexithymia
Randy,
fit?
we gotta stick to this topic. We could talk about that another time or the questions, but it does,
Okay,
and emotions do, and yeah, I think Maria's gonna get into that maybe to some extent. So yeah, let's um
all right,
please
good.
continue. Yeah,
So avoiding going beyond your limits with sensory issues. So specific to sensory issues, uh, really starting to acknowledge and collecting some of this information. What are the things that feel disruptive or really uncomfortable to me? Is it that bright light and then I have the bad interaction with my spouse? Or is it more like looking through crowded drawers and not being able to find what I need? Or people standing too close to me? What are kind of your challenges? And then where are these things happening the most? Is it shopping, family gatherings? Is it stubbing your toe or being in a restaurant, sporting events, transportation, being in appointments, again, my messy drawer, or something as simple as someone like fiddling with their water bottle or tapping their fingers on something, you know, all of those things, maybe all of them, they're all my favorites. But this is your brain injury, and it has turned up the volume on all of this stuff. You're not at fault, but now what do we do with that? What do we do with this symptom of head injury?
Maria, quick question. So I've seen in the literature they call this the ABC model. The behavioral changes antecedent is before the behavior, B is the behavior, and C is the consequence. And they talk about the antecedent, but the antecedent, the things before the behavior, is really a list of problems. It's a bunch of things, you know, it's like the sensory and the tapping and the this and the things that are out of our control. Um, my question is, it's always a lot of things. It's not just one thing. So how do you deal with that?
You know, I don't think I use ABC correctly. I've kind of taken that and I appreciate it, but I sort of scoop it into a different pot that makes sense to me. I see A the same, right? It's the A is someone standing too close to me, and it's really making me feel like I'm getting like scratched on the inside. I feel very uncomfortable and maybe even upset. And then the B, the behavior generally for me includes another person. And so with that, the opportunity to not get frustrated about the thing that had nothing to do with that person, right? Someone was standing too close to me when I was waiting for the bus, or when I was, you know, standing in line at the store, and then now I'm back to a safe place, and that's where I'm getting frustrated. And you know, of course, if you can stop yourself, very hard for many brain injured persons to do because of our impulsivity and because of the lack of filter. So can I talk to the people who are in my world and share with them you know, when that happens, can you walk away? Not can I walk away, because I probably won't have the bandwidth to do that. And so if, let's say, option one is A is the person at the store too close to me, B is I come home and I get frustrated with my partner, and, you know, pour a glass of water on the floor. And then C is the consequence, and I'm feeling horrible about myself and blah, blah, blah. That's one way it could go. And that's obviously not what we want with ABC. Or the other option, which is A, the person stands too close to me at the store. B, I'm getting upset and frustrated at home at my partner, and my partner notices and walks away. They do not get involved. They get out of the kitchen. They get out of there. And maybe I don't pour the water. And then C, I have an opportunity to sit with what happened and say, you know, I'm realizing I was in a total sensory overwhelm and I was taking it out on you. Thanks for walking away.
Thank you for explaining that.
I'm still trying to come up with ways that we can do it ourselves. I just think, unfortunately, for many people with brain injuries, fatigue plays such a big role that if you have fatigue and you have this heightened situation because you were having a sensory overwhelm, then oh, sorry, Moss, I think you raised your hand earlier and I didn't answer.
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt your statement. I didn't raise it earlier. If I did, it was a mistake. I just wanted to say that that was something I recognized early on, and I identified it as the transition. In order to make the transition in my brain, in order to articulate it, it's not there because I'm being prompted by all these things and distracted by all these things. I can't get to the information of the words to articulate it. And so every time I try, it just goes worse and worse. And then the other people get frustrated. So what you're saying about other people being responsible for, in a sense, me, but it's more responsible for our relationship, for our connection, for our interaction, which is both our responsibility. And by asking that request in advance, that is being responsible, that I recognize that I can't always do this when I would like to, because I would have done that, yes, prior to my injury. And I recognize now I can't, and that's interfering with our relationship. So I don't look, other people have looked at it as being a dependent request. And we have something about that in this country, but it's part of that the brain just can't transition to it, regardless of how hard I try.
Thank you.
So anyway, I just wanted to see if that was your experience.
Yeah, I think that's a super, I like that way of describing it. And I think you can think about it like, oh, I'm giving this to the other person to deal with. However, I think, like, in the end, we also have to hold ourselves accountable for when that person walks away, not following them, not saying, well, this is why I'm frustrated right now and why aren't you listening to me? We have to let them go. And that's part of that dance. And I think really when we kind of like is that your name?
Yes.
Was saying earlier, when we are in a constant state of like self-judgment and I need to explain why and all of this stuff, then we lose a little bit of the like humanness that all people, both diverse with disability and people who are neurotypical, all of us are asking for each other to support us in a human way. And our requests are just different. And I think if we can get clear with those requests, it makes a lot of the self-judgment that we hold on to go away, because then we can see something happen. Maybe not the first 20 times, maybe the first 20 times it doesn't go just how we wanted, but then it does. Then it starts to be like a new dance with those that we're close to, like you said, Maz.
The analogy that I always hear or have seen is the people opening a door for somebody that's using crutches or a wheelchair. It looks like they need them to open the door. We have specific needs. What Maz wrote in the chat, and then you answer her question, she had also was describing a specific to her brain injury core problem, you know, with the prompting. Because I know Maz and I've talked to her, and Randy also with his social interaction with people. There's another layer to it of that's also a brain injured part of us. So it's really hard to do the steps that you just said, but it's not like you can't do it. It's just really hard to do it. So let's continue with the talk about like how do you get people, or that's a future question, but how do you get the baby steps of that progression to happen realistically for somebody?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Let's let's go back to the talk though. We're having a discussion and yeah.
yeah, just so I stay on track, I will kind of come back to that, but just in this first chunk about knowing your limitations. So first it is like starting to notice what are those areas that are challenging, or experiences that are challenging for you in regards to sensory. And then I put on here for number 2, internal and external boundaries. So a lot of us are familiar with external boundaries. No, I will not be coming to your party. It's too much action and too loud, too many people bumping into me. Or, you know, no, I can't ride the bus. I need to have someone pick me up directly at my home. Those are boundaries. Those are explaining to someone what your needs are. And internal boundaries, I think, are super important too. This is like telling yourself, if I go on my phone all day and I'm looking at screens, that is a total sensory overload. And that most likely is not going to put you in your best mental space. So setting a timer for 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever you can manage to be on that cell phone looking at a screen. But you're the one that's setting that boundary for yourself. And there are tons of areas where this comes up. Again, when I want to be seen as normal, I go to a party with people and I'm there far too long, and then I'm really, really grouchy later. So my internal boundary is I go to the party for 1 hour. And if people say, stay for the party, aren't you having fun? I have to have that strong boundary inside of me saying, like, the rule for me is 1 hour. That's it. You know, no one, as an adult, no one is going to make me do anything. I have to make myself to make that choice. Hold that boundary, excuse me. And then planning your days. So most of us have a routine, and that's generally a great way to start your recovery as a brain injured person, is to stick with a routine. And within that routine, on these days where there's different stuff, you would do well to know that you have limits. And so making room for things like unexpected changes. It's pretty normal for, and of course I keep saying normal, you know, brain injury is abnormal, but the behaviors I'm talking about today and the symptoms I'm talking about today are completely normal for people with a brain injury, which is probably you or someone you know or work with. So with that in mind, flexibility in the brain and being able to pivot if someone says like, oh, hey, I can't pick you up anymore to go to your doctor's appointment. That can create a lot of frustration and anger, and it can be really hard to know what steps to take to figure out how to get to your doctors now. So having room, having space in your day for flexibility is really important. And that kind of goes with this last little, well, not last, but making space for those days you do have activities, or just in general, and complementing it with rest. So rest might be having a meditation, or sitting with your eyes closed and listening to a song, or listening to nothing at all. That's going to be different for each of us, what rest means. And again, each of us are in a different place on our healing journey. But just knowing that cramming a bunch of things into a day and expecting it to go well is great if nothing goes wrong at all and no one changes the plan at all. But if they do, it's hard to then be flexible and maneuver around those changes. And that is pretty typical for brain injury survivors. And then the last piece that we'll talk about is making clear requests. And I'm sort of talking about here spouses or caretakers, family members. So self-advocacy in that way is going back, even in our relationships, to those that are close to us, avoiding explaining why I need something. Because even people who know you really well can get extremely confused and unsure of what the request is. Again, sometimes we're telling those stories because it helps us understand what our request actually is. Or sometimes we're telling it because maybe we feel we might embarrass ourselves, or we're uncomfortable. And so just reminding yourself that people can oftentimes get lost, and so they can't really help us as much to give us what we need if we're not able to ask for what we need clearly.
Thank you. That's a great point, and that's a good list. Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate with that, and they're putting in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to use the chat really.
I'll take care of the chat. Sorry, I was muted and I was trying to say that. Yeah.
No problem. So how to get clarity. And I think someone made a good point that it's hard if it feels difficult to stay organized. And one of the things that I love is the brain dump. So after something goes poorly, for example, someone standing too close to me at the store, that creating some frustration, me coming home, having a bad interaction with my partner, you know, obviously recovering from that, getting over it, but then trying to go through and write down like what happened, write down as much detail as I can of what happened, what I can remember, and then kind of look through it and see like, oh, you know what, that was super crowded place, people too close to me. And by getting out all that information, it helps me resist the temptation to go say to my partner, just so you know, this is all the things that happened that brought me to being kind of a jerk before, right? And they don't really need to subject themselves, I guess, if they ask you, which I think a lot of times they don't. But you know, instead I can come to that person, that partner or family member, and just simply say, I'm sorry for how that went. And then the other thing is just writing down things as they happen so that you're getting clarity both in situations that don't go well and also just in your day-to-day. This is more for compiling information so that when you are with people who we get limited time with, like a doctor, or if you do DVR, is it or even disability services at your school, all those different places. Sometimes, especially when we're sort of with the person in charge, they really don't have time to listen to all the things that are challenging for us. And instead, if we can give them pretty clear like needs or clear requests, then they can take that and put it into action. So things like, walking is challenging in the cold, but I can walk well in the summer, so at this time, because it's cold and rainy, please can I try to get a ride from door to door? Or more emotional, like I can't stop crying, but I'm just really overwhelmed. I'm happy to be taking my medication. It's helping with certain things, but I just feel sleepy all the time. So starting to take note of what's going on, and then by yourself or leaning on a person, a buddy, to start making that into a request, a clear request.
There was a question about sometimes people don't believe that. Not sometimes, people don't believe that. So how do you get around that, or how do you get them to understand if they think you're lying, if they think you're, Randy, what's the term?
Malingering?
Yeah, malingering. Yeah.
Sometimes people think you're lying about the list that I have here.
The needs that you have, the needs with like the cold, like the temperature difference, or the crying because you're overwhelmed from what led you to there, and then you get there and you start crying and they don't understand why you're crying. How do you deal with when they don't believe what you're saying?
Well, so two things. I'll answer that, but I think in this specific list, these are examples of things that I would encourage you to be making a list of these sort of day-to-day issues that are happening, compiling a list of these types of things, so that when you are with your provider or with disability services, or the people that are helping you get the job or transportation, then you have a clear request that you can share with them.
Thank you for that clarification as per why the list is there. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is more like data points of what's going on with you. Now, to the second thing about not being believed, that's hard. I think it's just so frustrating. I think that that's one of the reasons why, if we can do some analysis of what's going on, if we can know ourselves, so that when we are coming to these appointments with people who might not take you seriously, if we can be really clear with them about what we need, then sometimes that might reduce them even having an opportunity to say, I don't believe you. If I just say, I'm really happy to be on meds, it's helping me, right? Well, I don't really need to say that. I could just say, the meds that you gave me are making me too sleepy. I think we need to find a different option, right? So that's a clear request, and that reduces any kind of holes for them to say, well, if this one's working, but it's making you sleepy, let me give you another prescription so that you're not so sleepy or something. You know what I mean? Like,
I think that if you're running into, particularly in healthcare, because I actually had this happen early on, I think if you're running into a healthcare provider that you've been going to, regardless of how long the relationship you've had with them, if they don't believe you, if they don't accept what you're telling them, you need to find a different provider. You're dealing with the wrong. It's as simple as that. Just find somebody else.
totally, I agree.
I ran into that with a doctor, and she actually put some stuff in my medical notes, and I contacted the CEO of the hospital and told him, you don't clean this thing up, I'm going to be coming after you. And they cleaned it up. And but that's me. I'm from the back east, so I don't have any problems with confronting the confrontation part of it. But
Thank you for that example, Randy, and I know others that
yeah.
have had that.
On this topic, I know that I still encounter medical providers. Once I've had 2 brain injuries, once you get beyond the crisis, you're not going to die, and they can release you home. They oftentimes are saying, well, you're cured now, you're okay, and you're kind of left to your own devices to figure it out or not figure it out. And that's, even in spite of, lots of military people that have head injuries and trauma, and they still have that that mindset. I'm sorry to interrupt. So
No, thank you for that statement, and the cured word that like sent a chill. That word bothers me. Oh, yeah.
I think that also brings me to another point, which is doctors' offices, especially most people with head injuries have spent a lot of time either in hospitals or being shuffled around to different providers. And so that place might start by just being everything, all the senses might be turned up, just the certain sounds or the smells of the hospital or the doctor's office. And so then when your doctor is late and you are late and you're starting to get the overwhelming emotions kind of coupled with that sensory stuff, by the time you get there, you can really be kicked off your train to ask a clear request. And so having these things written down, I use old-fashioned paper because I just use a dumb phone, but most people I know have a smartphone and you can keep notes in there. And so keeping, maybe your ongoing list of challenges, but then also having your note specific request for your doctor. And if they ask you, okay, you want a different medication, well, why? Then you go to your notes that are, the challenges that I'm having. Well, because with this medication, I'm sleepy all the time. With this medication, I'm tired all the time, yeah, not a surefire way to get exactly what you need, but I think it gets us closer. So now here I have my silly little Will Ferrell, I think that's his name, and he's being the elf guy, Buddy, the elf. So who is our safe buddy? This can be, I think, for a lot of people, if you're younger when you have your accident or your brain trauma, concussions, whatever you're dealing with, it might be your partner, it might be a parent, someone who understands your brain injury, someone that you trust, someone that knows your boundaries. And this is a person who maybe is noticing certain things that you could also put into that list of challenges, noticing what's hard for you. And they might be able to sit with you and discuss what these requests might be for a specific appointment that you have coming up, so that you can really make the most out of that time with your provider and be on your way to feeling like you can experience your life in a good way. And I know not everyone has a safe buddy. I know there's a lot going on with Brain Injury Alliance, but in groups, in online forums, but also just using like Siri or Alexa, things that you can say, hey, add this to my list, and you don't have to type it all up. You could verbally say it. That can be helpful, or just having a plain paper and pen that is your list that's open, and you can just write down things, pen to paper, of what's going on. I used to know a girl that wore a pen around her neck and have like a little thing of paper just as a reminder, because we do forget things, and that is also a normal symptom of brain injury.
It seems that there's something of a I'm not sure what to call it, a chicken and the egg here, in that a lot of what I think you're talking about, what I keep thinking about is the cognitive flooding that takes place, which only compounds all of this. And yet at the same time, a lot of what the experiences that you're talking about contribute towards the flooding.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely. I think the flooding and then sort of the lack of flexibility together can create some of these emotional outpourings. And so those are important things to be aware of and be able to label as symptoms. And I think, some of our very basic needs, sleeping and eating and sticking to our routine as best we can, those things are going to help bolster us, so that when we are forced to be flexible, it might not knock us off of our seat as much. And so that's part of why I put in that previous slide, planning rest for when you have these days with things like a doctor's appointment, things like an important meeting, or even things like a family party where you're not going to have as much control over how things go. And so your ability to bounce back when something doesn't go your way is completely normal. Plan for that. You're planning for those occasions. Okay, so this is an image of me, I think about 2 months after my accident, maybe 3. And I actually am holding on to a physical therapist who came to my house. My mom was able to get arranged for that service, and she really was advocating for me at that time. So, you know, I should have put the last question first, which is, can I advocate for myself? Sometimes we are not able to do that early in recovery, or even if we maybe are having some other challenges happening in our life. And so really being honest with yourself about, am I able to ask for the things I need? Am I able to push people or, you know, call people and do these things that really unfortunately are part of advocating for yourself? It's kind of the squeaky wheel is how I've often thought about it.
How long ago was your injury, Maria?
In 2006, so quite a while ago.
A car accident or?
Yes, yeah.
Mm.
And this is actually a story about something that happened more recently, and I'll make it snappy, but I had a heart issue happening because of another medical device. And so I was at Harborview. They were doing the radiologist was taking images and basically let me know that he was not going to be able to remove this device that I needed removed from my heart. And the proper person to do so was at Stanford. And I spent probably 2 months calling every other day, checking if Stanford had received the stuff from Harborview, calling and calling and calling. And I don't know what would have happened if I wasn't able to do that. I didn't have as many responsibilities at that time. And so I was more able to do that. But that's sometimes the type of advocacy we need to be able to do in order to be taken care of in the ways that we deserve to be taken care of. And that really takes me to that second piece, which is our number one job. I think, especially as brain injury survivors, when we're looking at the world and our brain is telling us this isn't a safe place, or it's putting a negative spin on things, the best thing we can do is make it so our brain and our body feel as safe as possible. And that does happen when we're able to get our needs met. And taking that seriously, because you do deserve that. And I think there are resources out there if you don't have kind of a support team.
Hmm.
Okay, and wrapping up here are 3 keys to remember. So starting to really understand what gets you charged up with some of these sensory things or otherwise. And then what are we doing to decompress? Is that enlisting our family or friends so that they know that when I come in this certain way, you know, just walk away and give me space to decompress? Or are there other things that you can do? Recognizing that both small and large sensory stimulation can be impactful. Right? For some people, even being in a car, whether you were in a car accident or not, just the feeling of being bounced around is not good for you or your nervous system. That's a sensory stimulation. So start to really notice and make note of those types of things. In the larger things too, the smell of curry maybe is hard for you, or meat cooking, that's a rough one for me. And then keeping track of what happens before you're charged up. So these same things, the sensory stuff or otherwise. focusing on what you need. So when we're talking to providers, resisting the urge to explain to them why we need something, or resisting the part of you that is self-judgmental, that wants to excuse the reason that you need something. Instead, really stick to the what it is you need, and start moving forward from that, and know that your needs might change, and that's okay too. You don't have to plan for that in the moment. Make the request you need today, and we'll get to tomorrow. And then lastly, try to have fun. I was sent home with a lot of documents from the headache clinic here in Washington. And I was kind of reading through all these things that they're saying to reduce headaches and other pain issues. And one of the things was have fun. And I thought, like, that is wild. I never have seen someone put something like that into a medical document. And so I just wanted to share that, because I think it can be easy to see the world in sort of a dark way, or like, how do I get through my day? And if you can start to pull in happinesses, like jumping off a diving board if you're physically able, or watching, a movie of cats rolling around, or a baby elephant being born, whatever it is that is enjoyable to you, and just notice how that might actually impact the rest of the challenging places that you are living currently as a TBI survivor. So thank you so much. I don't know if there's any questions, or Daniel, if you wanted to throw anything out.
I wanted to throw too much out, so I was trying to think of what point I should try to close with, because it's like kind of everything you said, I was like, oh, that relates with these experiences, this lack of support, the way the brain injury problems impact everything that you're saying, the way the emotional maturity is necessary to do some of these things, and the self-judgment's its own can of worms. I think that the brain injury problems and the lack of support to allow you to have those opportunities. I didn't talk to anyone about brain injury for a long time, 17 years. That support buddy idea was like, oh my God, what if I had someone that I could actually talk to about this? That would have been great. But it's really hard to find that sometimes. So I see what you're describing as like a list of what we can do for ourselves and what hopefully others can eventually help us with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that's exactly the reason, Dan, why and I think this is true for a lot of people, why I find it easier to, it's a hell of a way to relate to people, but it's just easier to talk to somebody else who's had a brain injury than somebody who hasn't.
Yes.
I was kind of lucky because I was hooked in real early to the rehab hospital in Indiana, and they had kind of a pilot study going on called this is back in 2007, and it's called BICS, Brain Injury Coping Skills, and they had the caregivers as well as me participate in this, so it helped both of us understand some of the trauma, the stresses that are each of us have, and helped us to better effectively, deal with what I was dealing with than it would have been, someone just feeling helpless, not understanding what's going on, why this isn't changed. So that was, it probably saved my life actually, but that's I'm not so sure we still have those kinds of programs in place. I'm sorry.
No, that's a great point. I see a couple people with their hand raised.
I apologize. I have impulse control. So
No, you're with other people with the same, so you're all good. And are you the Zoom user that just says Zoom user, Dan, or is that something else?
Something happened, and this is really upsetting for me because this happens a lot. When Randy was talking about you need to get a new provider, I started writing my situation, and that Harbor Review Administration had made sure that everybody in Seattle, everywhere I turned, even back to my former neuropsychologist in California to go against me. And every time I write that on my computer is erased. I got disconnected from the Zoom meeting, and I don't have the chat anymore. And I was now reconnected as a Zoom user rather than my name. So, I'm sorry, but this is just too much. But I appreciate you, Maria. I appreciate all that you provided over the years. There's still things I haven't done. I did want to say that, and some people have difficulty with this, but I had actually found that I was given Ritalin, a small dose, and that actually suppressed all the sensory overload.
Wow, that's incredible.
It also gave me back language skills in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So there's only small research on the dyslexia that it took away on people who were born with dyslexia. But I know Ritalin is such a controlled substance that doctors aren't willing to give that. But I've improved so much by just some of these some interventions that are medical that aren't typically given to people with brain injury. So I just wanted to put that out there in case anybody has a way of just trying that for themselves, and see if they have experience with that too. Because it was given to me for fatigue, not for all these other things, but I found benefit in all these other things. I no longer have those challenges that you're talking of, but still all that you're talking about applies to so many other things. Almost all the things that have to do with brain injury. So keep the talks going, Maria. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I too, I take, it's methylphenidate, but Ritalin, I take that. And I'm a CPA, and, you know, and concentration has been a huge issue. So that has actually allowed me to continue working and work effectively, and also makes me less anxious about social, you know, interactions where there's so much stimulus coming in. So it was miraculous for me. So too.
Yeah, very miraculous.
Brain injury problems are very unique, and there's many of them, and then different treatments will work for specific things, and that obviously intermixes with, I look at it as the list of problems that you have that are then influencing the agitation, sensory, and other problems alike. And then I think that everything you described here is a really good way to learn how to manage ourselves, be aware of what we're dealing with. That awareness of our problems is a whole topic that we can discuss someday, because that's a strange skill to develop of internal, you know. And anyway, but does anyone else have any other questions?
The question I have is, I mean, I appreciate your distinction about not saying the reason why, only keeping it to the narrow, what's the request? My experience, however, is that really doesn't go well, and people insist on telling me I'm wrong. And I don't have tools for that. You know, I could find new friends and find new doctors, but the problem is, no, I actually can't. I'm having trouble finding support, you know, that's effective, rather than just let's complain together, that kind of support.
I absolutely, I agree with you. I think the why can certainly be important. And a lot of times doctors or other providers need that information to then take that next step and honor your request. So I think I'm merely trying to say sometimes it can be helpful to have some specific, you know, reasons for why, and then the request, versus for some folks with brain injury, because of filtering and because of impulse control, it can be, and because of sometimes not understanding ourselves, we can get to something and be unprepared, and then want to share a lot and get a little bit lost. And that's been my experience and the experience of some people I've been working with. So I'm just trying to kind of not say that it's wrong. I think it's right to tell people why you need something, but just if you can make it as clear as possible, you might end up benefiting more.
Right, and what I'm hearing from you is that it's an adaptive skill to accommodate the other person, to limit what we ask for so that they possibly can understand. However, there's an attitude widely present that they don't want to understand, and they want to disagree, and that's the part that remains a problem. Because so I'm acknowledging it's useful what you're saying,
Yeah.
but it's not enough.
Yes, can I say something about that? I agree 100%. And the fact that it took me 3 years of trying to explain and realizing they don't understand and they can't understand, these problems aren't even on their radar, for me to give up on that and develop a different strategy. And it's not the right strategy, and it's not fair, and it's ridiculous actually that we have to, in our brain injured mind, also do that computation. And yet it's probably more effective. It's a sign of the problems clearly, and I don't know how to deal with that aside from talking about it. But yeah, it's really messed up, but it leads to a better general outcome, and it is a skill. The list and description that Maria gives me a way to think about how I could implement this, how I could develop this. What are the pillars of the support that we're trying to create for ourselves? But yeah, it doesn't exist, and it's ridiculous.